What would you do if the most terrifying predator in the war was not a tank or a plane or a bomb, but a single man who could smell your fear from half a mile away? A man whose ancestors had hunted across the plains of America for thousands of years, and who carried that ancient knowledge in his blood, like a curse that could never be broken. Tonight, I am going to tell you about the Comanche hunters, the Native American soldiers who turned the forests of Europe into killing grounds and made the Nazi war machine tremble with a fear they had never known before. By the time this story is over, you will understand why German officers offered bounties for their heads, and why some of those officers chose suicide rather than face capture by men they believed were not entirely human. Before we begin, I need something from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. I want to know what corner of the world is hearing this story tonight. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, yet please hit that button, because we need your support to keep bringing you these hidden histories that powerful forces have tried to erase. Your subscription is what keeps us alive. The story begins in the summer of 1940 in the red dirt country of southwestern Oklahoma. The Comanche Nation had been confined to reservation lands for barely 60 years, and the old ways were dying. The great buffalo hunts that had defined their culture for generations were nothing but memories passed down from grandfathers who still bore the scars of wars against the United States Army. The young men of the tribe worked on cattle ranches and oil fields, trying to survive in a world that had taken everything from them. But the elders remembered. They remembered what their people had once been, the finest light cavalry in the world, warriors so skilled that the Spanish, the Mexicans, and finally the Americans had all learned to fear the sound of Comanche war cries echoing across the plains. They remembered the hunting techniques passed down through countless generations, the ability to track prey across any terrain, the patience to wait for days without moving, the killer instinct that could be turned on in an instant and turned off just as quickly. And they remembered something else, something that was never spoken of directly, but only hinted at in stories told late at night when the fire had burned down to embers. They remembered the gifts. Not every Comanche warrior possessed them. Perhaps 1 in 100, perhaps fewer. But those who did were marked from birth. They could see things that others could not see, hear things that others could not hear, sense the presence of prey from impossible distances. And when the hunt began, something changed inside them. Something ancient woke up, something that belonged to a time before memory, when the line between human and animal was not so clearly drawn. The United States military learned about these gifts almost by accident. In 1940, a group of Comanche men enlisted in the Army and were assigned to the 4th Signal Company for training as radio operators. The military's interest in Native Americans was primarily linguistic. They wanted to use indigenous languages as unbreakable codes for battlefield communications. The Comanche language, with its complex tonal structure and complete unfamiliarity to European ears, seemed perfect for this purpose. But during training, the officers noticed something strange about a small group of the Comanche recruits. These men performed far above expectations in every physical and tactical exercise. They could navigate unfamiliar terrain without maps. They could detect ambushes before any visible signs appeared. And during night training exercises, they moved through darkness, as if they could see in the complete absence of light. The Army conducted a series of classified tests on these individuals. The results were never fully disclosed, but fragments of the documentation have surfaced over the decades. One report describes a Comanche private named Charles Whitehorse, who was able to locate hidden observers at distances exceeding 800 yards in dense forest. Another describes a corporal named Samuel Yellowbird, who successfully predicted the movements of a simulated enemy patrol with 97% accuracy over a 2-week period. The military did not understand what they were dealing with. They attributed the abilities to superior training and cultural heritage. They did not realize that they had stumbled upon something far older and far more dangerous than any conventional military skill. The man who would become known as the greatest Comanche hunter of the Second World War was not part of the original Signal Company recruits. His name was Joseph Running Wolf, and he did not enlist until the spring of 1942, after the attack on Pearl Harbor had transformed American indifference into burning rage. Running Wolf was different from the other gifted Comanches in ways that even the elders found disturbing. His abilities had manifested early, too early. By the age of 7, he could track jackrabbits across rocky ground where they left no visible prints. By 12, he could sense the presence of rattlesnakes before they were close enough to strike. And by 16, he had developed a reputation that made even the bravest men in his community uncomfortable. They said he could smell death, not metaphorically, literally. He claimed he could detect when a living creature was approaching its end, a sickness in the blood, a weakness in the heart, something that gave off an odor only he could perceive. The elders called it the gift of the crow, the ability to sense what the death birds sensed, to know which creatures would soon become food for the scavengers. When Running Wolf arrived at basic training, the drill sergeants did not know what to make of him. He was not physically imposing, 5 feet 9 inches tall, 160 pounds, quiet to the point of seeming mute. He followed orders without complaint, but there was something in his eyes that made the other recruits keep their distance. A flatness, an absence of something that should have been there. It was during a live fire exercise that Running Wolf first demonstrated what he could do. The recruits were advancing through a simulated battlefield with instructors firing blanks from concealed positions to create stress and confusion. Most of the men stumbled through the course, making predictable mistakes and earning predictable criticism. Running Wolf completed the course in half the expected time. He did not stumble. He did not hesitate. He moved through the chaos as if he knew exactly where every shot would come from before it was fired. When he reached the end of the course, the senior instructor was waiting for him with an expression that combined disbelief and something that looked very much like fear. "Private Running Wolf, how did you know where my men were positioned?" Running Wolf's answer was recorded in the instructor's report and would later be referenced in dozens of classified documents about the Comanche hunter program. "I could smell them, sir. They smelled like they were already dead." The Army did not send Running Wolf to the Signal Company with the other Comanche code talkers. Instead, he was transferred to a unit that did not officially exist, a unit composed entirely of indigenous soldiers with abilities that defied conventional explanation. The unit was designated the 45th Infantry Division Special Reconnaissance Detachment, but the men who served in it called themselves the Ghost Walkers. The Ghost Walkers were deployed to North Africa in November of 1942 as part of Operation Torch. Their mission was simple in theory and nearly impossible in practice. They were to operate behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence on German and Italian positions and eliminating high-value targets when the opportunity arose. They would work in 2-man teams carrying minimal equipment and relying on their abilities to survive in territory crawling with enemy soldiers. Joseph Running Wolf was paired with a Kiowa scout named Thomas Blackbird. The 2 men could not have been more different in temperament. Where Running Wolf was silent and withdrawn, Blackbird was gregarious and quick to laugh. Where Running Wolf seemed to absorb light, Blackbird radiated warmth and energy. But in the field, they moved as one organism, anticipating each other's actions, communicating without words, hunting with a synchronization that seemed almost supernatural. Their first confirmed kill came 3 days after landing in North Africa. A German reconnaissance patrol had been tracking Allied movements near the town of Oran. The patrol consisted of 12 men, including a signals officer carrying encryption equipment that Allied intelligence desperately wanted to capture. Conventional forces had been unable to intercept the patrol without alerting larger German units in the area. Running Wolf and Blackbird tracked the patrol for 18 hours across terrain, that offered almost no cover. They moved at night and buried themselves in the sand during the day, breathing through hollow reeds and remaining motionless for hours at a time. When they finally struck, it was just before dawn, when human alertness is at its lowest. The engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. Blackbird neutralized the sentries with a silence that witnesses would later describe as unnatural. No sound, no struggle, just bodies dropping to the ground as if their strings had been cut. Running Wolf moved through the sleeping Germans with a knife that had been forged by his grandfather from a railroad spike. 11 men died without waking. The 12th, the signals officer, was taken alive with his equipment intact. The captured officer was interrogated by Allied intelligence. He provided valuable information about German communications protocols, but it was his description of the attack that drew the most attention from military analysts. He said he had been sleeping when he felt something change in the air around him. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence, a weight in the darkness that had not been there before. He opened his eyes and saw a figure standing over him, a man whose face was painted with symbols the officer did not recognize, a man whose eyes reflected light like an animal's eyes, a man who smiled at him with teeth that seemed too sharp to be human. The officer said he tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to reach for his weapon, but his body would not respond. He could only lie there, paralyzed, watching, as the figure leaned close and whispered something in a language he did not understand. Then everything went black. When he regained consciousness, he was bound and gagged in an Allied camp 30 miles from where the attack had occurred. He had no memory of being transported, no memory of anything between the whispered words and waking up as a prisoner. And for the rest of his life, he would insist that what attacked his patrol that night was not a man. It was something else, something that wore the shape of a man but was not truly human. The success of the Oran operation established the Ghost Walkers as a valuable asset for Allied commanders. Over the following months, Running Wolf and Blackbird conducted dozens of missions across North Africa. They infiltrated enemy camps that were thought to be impenetrable. They eliminated officers whose deaths threw German operations into chaos. They gathered intelligence that proved crucial to Allied advances, and they earned a reputation among Axis forces that spread like wildfire through the ranks. The Germans called them Die Schattenjäger, the Shadow Hunters. Italian soldiers called them I Demoni della Notte, the Demons of the Night. Both names carried the same implication. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were something to be feared, on a level that went beyond the normal dangers of war. Rommel himself allegedly issued a standing order that any soldier who captured or killed one of the Shadow Hunters would receive an immediate promotion and a significant cash bounty. The order acknowledged that the hunters operated in pairs and warned that engaging one meant the other was certainly nearby waiting to strike. It recommended that any unit encountering signs of Shadow Hunter activity should immediately withdraw and call for reinforcements. The order was widely distributed, but it changed nothing. The Shadow Hunters could not be found unless they wanted to be found. They left no tracks. They made no sound. They appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as completely. Soldiers who went looking for them simply vanished. Their bodies were sometimes found days later arranged in positions that seemed designed to maximize psychological impact on whoever discovered them. But the real terror came from the stories told by the rare survivors, men who had encountered the Shadow Hunters and lived to describe the experience. Their accounts were remarkably consistent, despite coming from soldiers of different nationalities who had never communicated with each other. They all described the same sensation, a feeling of being watched by something that was not quite human, a presence in the darkness that seemed to drink in light and sound. And they all described the same phenomenon, a smell, a sweet, sickly odor that filled the air before an attack, the smell of death. the smell that Joseph Running Wolf carried with him like a cloud of invisible poison. The invasion of Sicily in July of 1943 marked the beginning of the Ghost Walkers' European campaign. The unit was expanded to include 8 two-man teams operating across the Italian theater. Running Wolf and Blackbird remained the most effective pair, but other teams were recording impressive results as well. The program was considered such a success that the Army began planning to deploy similar units for the eventual invasion of France. But something was changing in Joseph Running Wolf, something that his partner Thomas Blackbird noticed first and reported to their commanding officer in a memo that would later become one of the most studied documents in the classified history of the program. Blackbird wrote that Running Wolf was becoming increasingly detached from reality. He would sometimes stop in the middle of a mission and stare at nothing for minutes at a time. When asked what he was looking at, he would say he was watching them die. Not enemy soldiers, everyone. He said he could see the death that waited for every living thing. He could see how and when each person would meet their end. And the visions were getting stronger. Blackbird also reported that Running Wolf's abilities were intensifying in ways that seemed impossible. His sense of smell had become so acute that he could track individuals by their scent from miles away. He could hear heartbeats through walls. He could sense the presence of humans in complete darkness from distances exceeding a quarter mile. And most disturbingly, he had developed what Blackbird called the stare. When Running Wolf looked at someone with the stare, they froze. Not metaphorically, literally. Their bodies stopped responding to their commands. Their voices stopped working. They became paralyzed prey waiting to be killed. Blackbird had seen it happen to enemy soldiers dozens of times, but lately he had seen Running Wolf use the stare on Allied personnel as well. A supply sergeant who had been slow to provide equipment, a lieutenant who had questioned one of Running Wolf's tactical decisions, a nurse who had accidentally bumped into him while he was eating. Each time Running Wolf had caught himself before any harm was done. But Blackbird could see the effort it required. The gift was growing stronger, and Running Wolf's control over it was growing weaker. The incident that finally forced military command to confront what they were dealing with occurred in September of 1943 near the town of Salerno. Running Wolf and Blackbird were conducting reconnaissance ahead of the main Allied advance when they encountered a German patrol that included a high-ranking SS officer. The officer was transporting documents that intelligence believed contained plans for defensive positions throughout central Italy. Blackbird wanted to observe the patrol and report its position so that a larger force could intercept it. Running Wolf disagreed. He said he could smell something on the SS officer, something different from ordinary death. Something that made his gift react in ways it never had before. He said the officer smelled like he had already killed. Many times. Women, children, people who could not fight back. The scent was layered and complex. Years of murder compressed into a single overwhelming stench that Running Wolf could not ignore. Against Blackbird's objections, Running Wolf moved to engage the patrol alone. What happened next was pieced together from Blackbird's testimony and the physical evidence found at the scene. Running Wolf did not simply kill the German soldiers. He dismantled them. When Allied troops arrived the following day, they found bodies arranged in a pattern that stretched across nearly 100 yards of forest floor. Each soldier had been killed with a single wound, but the wounds were placed with surgical precision designed to cause maximum pain before death. The SS officer had been kept alive the longest. His wounds indicated that he had survived for several hours. His face was frozen in an expression of such absolute terror that the soldiers who found him refused to look at it directly. And carved into the officer's chest in letters 2 inches deep was a single word in the Comanche language. The word meant hunter. When Running Wolf returned to Allied lines, he was covered in blood that was not his own. His eyes were completely black. The whites had disappeared entirely, leaving only pupils that seemed to absorb light, like holes in the fabric of reality. He walked past the sentries without acknowledging their challenges. He walked through the camp without responding to anyone who spoke to him. He walked until he reached his tent, and then he collapsed and did not move for 3 days. When he finally woke, his eyes had returned to normal. He had no memory of what had happened after engaging the German patrol. The last thing he remembered was smelling the SS officer and feeling something inside him break loose. Something that had been chained up for a long time. Something that was very, very hungry. The military response to the Salerno incident was swift and severe. Running Wolf was removed from active combat duty and transferred to a secure facility in England where he could be studied by a team of specialists. The official explanation was that he was suffering from combat fatigue and needed extended rest. The true purpose of his confinement was to determine whether his abilities could be understood and potentially replicated. The tests conducted on Running Wolf over the following weeks were extensive and often brutal. He was subjected to sensory deprivation. He was exposed to extreme temperatures. He was given drugs that were supposed to enhance or suppress various psychological states. Through it all, he remained cooperative and calm. Too calm, according to the doctors who examined him. He answered their questions with a patience that bordered on indifference. He submitted to their procedures without complaint, and he watched them with those dark eyes that never seemed to blink. The lead researcher on the project was a psychiatrist named Dr. William Morrison. His reports provide the most detailed account of what Running Wolf had become, and what he believed was responsible for the transformation. Morrison documented that Running Wolf's sensory abilities were genuine and measurable. In controlled tests, he demonstrated the ability to detect sense at concentrations far below the threshold of normal human perception. He could identify individuals by smell alone from samples collected days earlier, and he could indeed sense something that Morrison could only describe as the proximity of death. When a laboratory rat was scheduled to be euthanized for an unrelated experiment, Running Wolf identified which rat would die hours before the procedure was conducted. He did the same thing with a terminal patient in a nearby hospital ward. He said he could smell the change, a sweetness in the blood that appeared when the body began to give up, a perfume that only he could detect. But it was Running Wolf's explanation of his abilities that disturbed Morrison the most. During their final interview, Running Wolf described what he believed was happening to him in terms that the psychiatrist found impossible to dismiss, despite their supernatural implications. Running Wolf said that his people had always known about the gifts. They were not random mutations or genetic accidents. They were inheritances, connections to something that had existed long before humans walked the earth, something that had hunted when the world was young and had never stopped hunting even after its physical form had faded from existence. He called it the Old Hunter, a spirit that lived in the blood of certain Comanche families. It slept most of the time. Generations could pass without it waking. But when it found a suitable host, someone whose soul resonated with its ancient hunger, it would begin to stir. And once it was fully awake, it would never sleep again. Running Wolf said the Old Hunter had been waking inside him since childhood. The tracking abilities, the death sense, the stare, these were all manifestations of its presence. And the war had accelerated the process. Each kill fed the spirit. Each death made it stronger. And now it was almost fully awake, almost in complete control. He told Morrison that he could feel it looking out through his eyes, thinking with his thoughts, using his body as a vessel for a hunger that had no limit and no end. He said that soon there would be nothing left of Joseph Running Wolf. There would only be the Old Hunter wearing his skin. Morrison asked what would happen then. Running Wolf smiled. It was not a human smile. Then it will hunt. That is all it knows how to do, all it has ever done. It will hunt until there is nothing left to kill. And then it will sleep and wait. And someday it will find another host. And the hunting will begin again. Doctor, Morrison recommended that Running Wolf be permanently confined and that the Ghost Walker program be immediately terminated. His recommendations were overruled. The war was reaching a critical phase. The invasion of France was imminent, and the military was not willing to give up its most effective unconventional asset based on what they dismissed as the superstitious beliefs of a psychologically compromised soldier. Joseph Running Wolf was returned to active duty in May of 1944, 1 month before D-Day. 1 month before, he would be unleashed on the soldiers of the Third Reich in ways that would make the Salerno incident look like a minor preliminary. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and the forests of France would run red with blood. The invasion of Normandy began on the 6th of June, 1944. While the world remembers the beaches and the paratroopers and the massive naval bombardment, almost no one remembers the shadow war that was being fought in the forests and hedgerows behind German lines. A war without rules, a war without mercy, a war that would leave scars on the land and the people that have never fully healed. Joseph Running Wolf was inserted into France 3 days before the main invasion as part of the advance team tasked with disrupting German communications and creating chaos in the rear areas. He was no longer paired with Thomas Blackbird. After the Salerno Incident Command had decided that Running Wolf was too unpredictable to work with a partner, he would operate alone, a single predator loose in a forest full of prey. The drop zone was a clearing in the Cotentin Peninsula, approximately 15 miles from the coastal defenses at Utah Beach. Running Wolf landed without incident and immediately began moving inland. His orders were to locate and destroy a German signal station that was coordinating defensive operations throughout the sector. Intelligence estimated the station was protected by at least 50 soldiers with heavy weapons and fortified positions. Running Wolf found the station on the second night. It was exactly where intelligence had predicted. A converted farmhouse surrounded by sandbag emplacements and barbed wire. Searchlights swept the perimeter at irregular intervals. Machine gun nests covered every approach. To any conventional assessment, the position was impregnable to a single operator. What happened at that signal station was reconstructed from German records captured after the war and from the testimony of a single survivor, a radio operator named Private Wilhelm Fassbender, who had hidden in a supply closet when the attack began and remained there for 18 hours until American forces arrived. Fassbender's account was initially dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind, but as more evidence accumulated and as similar accounts emerged from other locations throughout France, military historians began to accept that something extraordinary had occurred that night. According to Fassbender, the attack began just after midnight. The first sign that something was wrong was the dogs. The Germans kept guard dogs around the perimeter, trained animals that would bark at the slightest disturbance. That night the dogs did not bark. They whimpered. Then they went silent. When soldiers went to check on them, they found the animals cowering in their kennels, shaking, refusing to move, staring at something in the darkness that the soldiers could not see. The searchlights went out next, not all at once, one by one, as if something was moving around the perimeter, cutting the power lines in sequence. The soldiers tried to restore the lights, but the generators would not start. The batteries were drained. Every backup system failed simultaneously. Then the screaming began. Fassbender said he could not see what was happening. He could only hear it. Gunfire, shouting, and underneath it all a sound he had never heard before and would never forget. A low rhythmic chanting in a language that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate directly in his skull. The words meant nothing to him, but the feeling they carried was unmistakable. Hunger, ancient, bottomless hunger that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The gunfire lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then, silence. Fassbender remained in the closet, too terrified to move. He heard footsteps moving through the farmhouse. Slow, deliberate, stopping at each room, checking each body, making sure the work was complete. The footsteps stopped outside the supply closet. Fassbender held his breath. He could see a shadow beneath the door, a shape that blocked the faint light from the hallway. The shadow stood there for what felt like hours. Then a voice spoke, a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against bone. "I know you are there, little rabbit. I can hear your heart beating. I can smell your fear. It tastes like honey." Fassbender did not respond. He could not respond. His body had stopped obeying his commands. He could only sit there in the darkness waiting to die. But death did not come. The shadow moved away. The footsteps receded. And then there was only silence. When American forces arrived the following afternoon, they found 49 German soldiers dead. The bodies had been arranged in a spiral pattern radiating outward from the center of the farmhouse. Each soldier had been killed with a single wound. The wounds varied in location, but they all shared one characteristic. They had been inflicted with a blade of some kind. Not a bayonet. Something older. Something that left marks the army coroners had never seen before. The signals equipment had been destroyed beyond repair. The documents had been burned. And carved into the wooden floor of the main room were symbols that none of the American soldiers recognized. Symbols that matched those found at the Salerno site. Symbols that would later be identified as ancient Comanche hunting markers. Signs left by a predator to warn other predators that this territory had been claimed. Wilhelm Fassbender was evacuated to England, where he spent 3 months in a psychiatric facility. He never fully recovered from what he experienced that night. For the rest of his life, he slept with the lights on. He refused to be alone after dark, and he would sometimes stop in the middle of a conversation and stare at nothing, listening, as if he could still hear that terrible chanting echoing in the empty spaces of his mind. The signal station attack was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Joseph Running Wolf moved through occupied France like a plague given human form. He struck German positions that were thought to be secure. He eliminated officers whose deaths threw entire divisions into confusion. He appeared and disappeared with a randomness that made prediction impossible and defense futile. The German High Command became increasingly desperate to stop him. They deployed their best trackers, hunter-killer teams composed of veterans who had fought partisans in the East and knew every trick of unconventional warfare. None of them returned. Their bodies were found days or weeks later, always arranged in those same spiral patterns, always marked with those same ancient symbols. One German general allegedly offered a reward of 100,000 Reichsmarks for the capture or confirmed kill of the shadow hunter. The reward was never collected. Instead, the general himself became a target. His staff car was ambushed on a road that had been swept for mines and declared secure just hours earlier. The driver and 3 guards were killed instantly. The general was found alive but unresponsive. His eyes were open but saw nothing. His mouth moved but made no sound. He remained in that state for 6 days before finally dying in a military hospital. The doctors who examined him found no physical injuries, no evidence of poison or disease. They concluded that he had simply been frightened to death. His heart had given out under the weight of a terror that exceeded human capacity to endure. By August of 1944, the German forces in France had developed an unofficial protocol for dealing with signs of shadow hunter activity. If patrols found the spiral patterns or the hunting symbols, they were to withdraw immediately and report to command. If soldiers heard the chanting, they were to fall back to fortified positions and wait for daylight. If anyone actually saw the hunter, they were to surrender immediately. Surrender was not guaranteed to save them, but it was the only chance they had. Not all of the ghost walkers were as effective as Joseph Running Wolf, but all of them left their mark on the war. Thomas Blackbird continued operating in Italy after his partnership with Running Wolf ended. He was credited with over 60 confirmed kills and the successful extraction of a dozen Allied prisoners from behind enemy lines. His gift was different from Running Wolf's. He could not smell death, but he could sense life. He knew where every living creature was within a radius of several hundred yards. Nothing could hide from him. Nothing could surprise him. He moved through enemy territory as if he had a map showing the location of every German soldier in real time. Blackbird survived the war and returned to Oklahoma, where he lived quietly until his death in 1987. Unlike Running Wolf, he seemed to maintain control over his abilities. He used them when necessary and suppressed them when they were not needed. In interviews conducted decades after the war, he described the gift as a tool, nothing more. He acknowledged that the elders spoke of spirits and ancient hunters, but he preferred to think of his abilities in practical terms. They helped him survive. They helped him protect his fellow soldiers. That was enough. But when asked about Running Wolf, Blackbird's demeanor changed. His voice dropped. His eyes grew distant. He said that what happened to Running Wolf was a warning, a reminder that some gifts come with prices too high to pay. He said that, toward the end of the war, he had seen Running Wolf one more time. It was in Germany. The Allies had crossed the Rhine and were pushing toward Berlin. Blackbird's unit was advancing through a forest that had been the site of heavy fighting. Bodies everywhere, German and American. The smell of death so thick it was almost visible. And standing in the middle of it all was Joseph Running Wolf. Blackbird said he almost did not recognize him. Running Wolf had lost weight. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor. His hair, which had been black, was now streaked with white. And his eyes. Blackbird said the eyes were the worst part. They were not human eyes anymore. They were the eyes of something that had stopped pretending to be human. Running Wolf looked at Blackbird and smiled, that same terrible smile from the Salerno incident, and he spoke in a voice that was not his own, a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground. "Hello, brother. I have been waiting for you. I wanted you to see what I have become, what we could have become together if you had not been so afraid." Blackbird asked what he meant. Running Wolf laughed. The sound made birds flee from the trees for a quarter-mile in every direction. The old hunter is fully awake now. Joseph is gone. He fought for as long as he could, but the hunger was too strong. Now there is only me, only the hunt. And I am going to hunt until there is nothing left. Nothing in this army, nothing in this country, nothing in this world. I will hunt until the earth is empty and silent, and then I will sleep for 1,000 years and dream of blood. Blackbird raised his weapon. He knew it was useless, but he had to do something. Running Wolf moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment he was standing 20 feet away. The next moment he was inches from Blackbird's face. His hand was wrapped around the barrel of the rifle. His grip was cold, cold like deep water, cold like the grave. "You cannot kill me, brother. Nothing can kill me. I am older than death itself, but I will not kill you. Not today. I want you to live. I want you to tell them what you have seen. I want them to know what is coming. The war is ending, but the hunt never ends. Remember that. The hunt never ends." Then he was gone, vanished into the forest without a sound. Blackbird never saw him again. The official records state that Private First Class Joseph Running Wolf was killed in action on the 15th of April, 1945, during operations near the town of Kolditz in eastern Germany. His body was reportedly recovered and buried in a military cemetery in France. The grave marker bears his name and his dates of service. It receives occasional visitors, researchers, historians, people who have heard fragments of the legend and want to pay their respects. But the grave is empty. Military documents declassified in the 1990s reveal that no body was ever recovered. The death certificate was created to close the file on an asset that had become too dangerous to acknowledge. Joseph Running Wolf simply disappeared from official records as completely as he had disappeared from that forest in Germany. There have been sightings over the decades, reports that most people dismiss as folklore or hoax. A figure matching Running Wolf's description was allegedly seen during the Korean War, operating in the mountains north of the Chosin Reservoir. Similar reports emerged from Vietnam, from Central America, from the Balkans, from Afghanistan. Wherever American forces have fought, there have been whispers of a shadow that hunts in the darkness, a presence that the enemy fears more than any weapon in the American arsenal. Some researchers believe that Running Wolf is still alive, that whatever possessed him has sustained his body far beyond any natural lifespan, that he wanders from conflict to conflict, feeding the endless hunger that drives him, that he has become exactly what he predicted, a hunter that will never stop, a predator that will never be satisfied. Others believe that Running Wolf died long ago, but that the thing inside him did not. They think it found a new host, perhaps several hosts over the years. They think it continues to move from warrior to warrior, generation to generation, waking in those whose souls resonate with its ancient hunger, creating new hunters to continue its eternal work. The Comanche elders have their own theory. They say that the old hunter was never meant to be awakened fully. It was supposed to remain sleeping. A potential that was never realized, a power that was never unleashed. The circumstances of the war, the endless killing, the rivers of blood that flowed across Europe, these things fed the spirit until it grew too strong to contain. They say that what happened to Running Wolf was a tragedy, not just for him, but for the spirit itself. The old hunter was never evil. It was simply what it was. A force of nature, a fundamental aspect of existence that had been given form in the early days of creation. It hunted because hunting was its purpose. It killed because killing was all it knew. But humans were not meant to carry such power. The human soul is too small, too fragile. It cannot contain something so vast and so ancient without being consumed. Running Wolf was destroyed, not because the spirit was malevolent, but because he was not strong enough to survive the union. No human could be. And this brings us to the most important part of the story, the part that separates those who were consumed by the darkness from those who found a way to resist it. Thomas Blackbird survived. He maintained control of his gifts. He used them without being used by them. And when asked how he managed to avoid Running Wolf's fate, his answer was always the same: faith. Blackbird was a Christian. He had converted as a young man after attending a mission school on the reservation. Some of his fellow Comanches criticized him for abandoning the old ways, but Blackbird never saw it as abandonment. He saw it as addition. He took the gifts his ancestors had given him and placed them in the service of something greater, something that could not be corrupted or consumed or turned to destruction. He said that when he felt the hunger rising inside him, when the gift demanded to be used, when the ancient instincts called for blood, he would pray, he would speak the words of Scripture, he would remind himself that he belonged to God, that his soul was not his own to surrender, that no spirit, no matter how ancient or powerful, could claim what had already been claimed by the Creator of all things. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Those words were Blackbird's armor, his shield against the darkness that had consumed his friend. He repeated them in the heat of battle. He whispered them in the cold hours before dawn. He held them close when the gift stirred inside him and demanded release. And they worked. They always worked, because the power of God is greater than any power on earth, greater than the old hunter, greater than the ancient spirits that lurk in human blood, greater than death itself. This is the truth that the story of the Comanche hunters reveals, a truth that applies not just to soldiers with supernatural gifts, but to every human being who has ever struggled against the darkness inside themselves. We all carry hunters within us, maybe not ancient spirits, maybe not supernatural predators, but something: anger, hatred, the desire for revenge, the hunger for power, the willingness to destroy others to get what we want. These are the hunters that stalk us all. These are the shadows that wait for moments of weakness, and without something greater to hold on to, without faith in something beyond ourselves, those hunters will eventually consume us. They will eat away everything good and leave only the hunger. They will turn us into predators who cannot stop hunting even when there is nothing left to kill. But there is hope. There has always been hope. Jesus Christ came into this world to defeat the hunters, to break the power of the darkness that had held humanity captive since the beginning of time. He faced the ultimate predator, death itself, and he conquered it, not with weapons, not with supernatural gifts, but with love, with sacrifice, with the willingness to lay down his life so that others might live. When you accept Christ into your heart, you are placing yourself under his protection. You are declaring that your soul belongs to him, that no hunter, no spirit, no power in heaven or earth or under the earth can claim what he has purchased with his own blood. Joseph Running Wolf never had that protection. He relied on his own strength, his own will, his own ability to control the thing inside him, and his own strength was not enough. It never is. We were not made to fight these battles alone. Thomas Blackbird understood this truth. That is why he survived. That is why he was able to use his gifts without being destroyed by them. That is why he lived to old age surrounded by family and friends, while his partner wandered the dark places of the world, consumed by an hunger that could never be satisfied. If you are watching this tonight, and you feel something hunting you, if there is a darkness inside that seems to grow stronger every day, if you are losing the battle against urges and impulses that frighten you, know that you do not have to fight alone. Call upon the name of Jesus. Surrender your soul to his keeping. Let him stand between you and whatever is pursuing you. He is stronger than any hunter. He is greater than any spirit. He has already won the victory. All you have to do is accept it. The war ended 80 years ago, but the hunt continues. Not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the hearts of every human being. The ancient spirits are still stirring. The old hunters are still searching for hosts. The darkness is still waiting for its chance to consume. But the light is stronger. It has always been stronger. And it always will be. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Stand firm, then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. You are not alone. You were never alone. The greatest hunter of all is fighting on your side, and he never loses. God bless you all. Stay safe. Stay faithful. And remember that no matter how dark the night becomes, the dawn is always coming. The hunt may never end, but neither does the love of God.